Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking a look at Microsoft Flight Simulator's Sim Update 7. Throughout the video we'll take a look at what's changed, what's been improved, what's been updated, and of course we'll see if anything's been broken along the way. This video is not intended to be completely comprehensive, but I'll try and give a good overview of what Microsoft Flight Simulator is like after Sim Update 7. Firstly we'll touch on the changes that we know have occurred in the sim according to Asobo themselves. Perhaps most interestingly, there's a slew of new aircraft available. The Boeing F18 Hornet I'm sure will be of interest to many. We also have the Velocity Volocopter, the Pilotus PC6 Porter, the Cubcrafter's NXCub, and the Aviat Pit Special S1S. There's also been 8 new handcrafted airports added into the sim, located in Central Europe and the United States. We're not going to be looking at all of those specifically today, but we'll come across a few of them throughout the video. We also have some new discovery flights and some new tutorials, which is nice to see, particularly the tutorials. And lastly, to my mind the most significant and perhaps the most interesting of all the updates, we now have early access to DirectX 12 within the sim. Anyway, in today's video we're first going to touch on just a couple of the UI changes that I've noticed in the sim, some good, some bad. We'll then take a brief look at the new additions into the sim in terms of aircraft. And then finally we're going to do a side-by-side comparison with the sim in both DirectX 11 and DirectX 12. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Overall I do think that Sim Update 7 has been a nice offering for the sim, however unfortunately we're going to be starting with a little bit of a bug. So let's first head to the world map. Overall in terms of the sim UI, I haven't found too many issues so far, but one that I have found and I do think is quite significant. It seems now we can no longer scroll around the globe at the moment using left click on the mouse. You can still zoom in and out, and of course you can still select various airports. We can also search for them up the top using the search bar. But overall it's a little bit disappointing to see such a fundamental thing having been broken in an update. One addition to the UI which I'm really happy to see, and I'm sure many of you will be as well, we can now choose whether at the end of the flight the logbook pops up or not. You can change that via the assistance options, and it means we can now shut down the aircraft without having that annoying pop-up ruining the immersion and ruining the flight. It is nice to see that one from Asobo. I know a lot of people have been asking for that for quite some time now, myself included. And it's really just one of those little touches that makes everything feel a little bit more sim-like and a bit less gamey. In terms of added tutorials, we now have a bush pilot section as well as an IFR navigation section. Again, nice to see Asobo continuing to add tutorials into the sim, as really the tutorial system has been a bit lackluster so far. The bush flying tutorials really just cover short field takeoff and landings, updrafts and downdrafts in mountain flying, as well as various water techniques. And the IFR tutorials pretty much covering what you'd expect. We've got climb and descent, turning and speed control, as well as basic radio navigation. I've yet to try any of them myself, but again really nice to see that sort of content now coming into the sim. Lastly, as a bit of an aside, we obviously have the optional paid content recently coming to the sim as well for the Reno air racing. As I say, I plan to cover that content in a later video, so we'll leave things there for now, but if you wish to purchase the content you can do so, currently with a significant discount. And if you are at all interested in purchasing, probably worth doing so sooner rather than later. Without the discount, it's actually quite a pricey DLC. Anyway, moving on to what we get for free with the update, we'll start taking a look at the various new additions in terms of aircraft to the sim. So starting with the Pilotus PC6 Porter, it might look very familiar to some of you, obviously we've already got one in the sim. Another one on the way as well, so we'll soon have 3 PC6s, which does seem somewhat excessive. But of course it's always nice to have a free option. Anyway, in terms of looking at the free aircraft, we're just going to briefly look at the external and internal modelling, and we'll take a few of them for a quick lap around the circuit. Overall the PC6 is quite a nice addition. The external modelling is very decent, the internal modelling very nice as well. The great thing about the internal modelling of the PC6, it's steam gauges as you can see, so a nice little difference there from the current Milviz PC6 offering. We're currently running the sim in DirectX 12 here, and I don't know if it's just my imagination, but it seems as though the clarity and the overall image quality not perhaps quite as good as DirectX 11 currently. And overall, whilst the quality of the PC6 cockpit is very nice, I would say that there are better default aircraft around. Overall though, certainly a very nice addition to the sim, again given that it's free particularly. As I say, we'll take a quick trip around the circuit, or really just a bit of a 180 back onto the runway here at Bugaglaga. So we'll get ourselves sat down in the left hand seat of the PC6 and briefly put the aircraft through its paces. So we're on the northeasterly runway here at Burglaga. We'll take the park brake off. And keeping the stick full back for now till we come down through the bottom of the hill. We're just going to carry out a very quick takeoff. We'll pull through 180, come back for a landing, just to give ourselves a very basic feel for the flight modelling of the aircraft. So down the slope we go, coming up on the power. Aircraft wanting to pull out to the left there with full power. Overall reasonably controllable on the rudder. And we're up. So we'll track more or less straight ahead. We're just going to pull through 180 to come back for a landing. Overall the flight model feels very default in nature. It's not bad, but it's certainly nothing special. Certainly not up to the standards of the Milviz PC6, but of course we'd be expecting that. We'll just track outbound a little bit further and then we'll make our 180 turn. And we'll maintain around 80 knots for now. Still got full power here at the moment. We've got full flaps as well, so quite a bit of drag, but just about managing to maintain 70 knots in the turn. You can see there's a lot of jerkiness with DirectX 12. I have been noticing that. Anyway, coming around onto final. Flaps already set. And we'll get the speed back to around 70, 65 knots. Yeah, so DirectX 12, at least on my system, really not offering anything in terms of performance improvements. If anything, it's actually rather hampering my experience in the sim, so a little bit disappointing, but of course it is a beta at the moment. I'm sure it will get improved as time goes on. Threading our way through the gap in the trees. Cut the power. And letting the aircraft settle onto the runway. There's touchdown, and we'll just come straight onto the brakes. Keep a little bit of speed as we come up the hill. And bring the aircraft to a stop. So overall, as I said, the PC6 very much default in nature. Not a bad aircraft, a nice addition to the sim, and certainly ideally suited to the kind of flying that you can do in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Overall, it's not as good as the Milviz PC6, but of course it's absolutely free. Next, onto the Volocopter, definitely the most interesting addition to the sim, I would say personally. As you can see for yourselves, we're currently located on a helipad in Dubai. Overall, the external modelling of the aircraft, pretty nice. It's certainly very crisp and clean. I believe that the Velocity Volocopter is ultimately designed to be a bit of an aerial taxi. Obviously quite similar both in terms of construction and design to a typical drone. And as I say, as a result, it makes it quite an interesting aircraft to fly. Internally, it's pretty basic, but that's probably true to life. Certainly quite a sleek, modern design in terms of aesthetic. Anyway, once again, we'll get ourselves in the left seat and we'll just take the aircraft for a little bit of a lap around the tower, bring it back for a landing to get a feel for the flight model. So, as we did with the PC6, we're just going to make a very quick flight in the Volocopter, get a bit of a feel for the flight modelling. Coming up on the power. And the aircraft lifting straight up into the hover, requiring no control input there. It's a very easy aircraft to fly overall. I guess there's some fairly sophisticated computers working behind the scenes to make the aircraft easy to fly. It's very strange to fly though. It's somewhere between a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft, and as much as it doesn't quite behave like either. Coming forward on the stick here at the moment, as you can see, quite slow to build up speed. Anyway, we're just going to do a quick lap around the tower. We'll come back for a landing. And again, a very strange experience to fly, but quite good fun, I have to say, and I think it's really well suited to the sim. It'll be really nice for exploring the scenery, particularly, I think, in city environments. And I'm pleased that Asobo added the Volocopter to the sim. It's much more interesting than, for example, the PC6. Obviously, we're going to have 3 of those in the sim soon. It's nice to have a free variant, of course. I think, again, the PC6 is very nicely suited to the best types of flying in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but having 3 of the same aircraft does seem a little bit excessive. Anyway, as I say, the flight model still feels fairly default in nature, but I do actually really like the aircraft to fly. It's so different from anything that I've flown previously. Can't come back on the power slightly, we'll start losing some altitude here. And as you can see for yourselves, you can more or less turn the Volocopter on a dime, just using rudder here to swing ourselves around. And we'll make our way back towards the pad. Yeah, so overall the Volocopter I think gets a big thumbs up. It's something different, something well suited to the sim. I don't think we're going to see anything else like this in the sim anytime soon. And as I said, it's a nice little flying challenge as well. It's so different from anything else that I've really experienced in a flight simulator. So just trying to bleed off that forward speed. Those camera effects are FS realistic, they're not default to the sim. And there's touchdown. As I said, overall the Volocopter gets a big thumbs up from me. I think it's quite good fun. Lastly, the one that I'm sure many of you are excited for, we have the Boeing F18 Hornet. Overall a welcome addition to the sim. It's obviously nice to have a freeware jet finally. That being said, I do think that the external modelling is somewhat simplistic. It doesn't hold up quite as well as some of the other aircraft in the sim. And worth noting as well, the carrier that you see in the background, nothing to do with the sim update, that's just a piece of freeware scenery. One omission that I thought was slightly disappointing, there's no new avatars available in the sim, so we're still stuck with our fairly casually dressed pilot here, or we can have our airline style pilot as well. Obviously both of them look a little bit out of place in the F18. In terms of the cockpit, overall pretty nice. I think it's modelled very well. Of course the avionics are pretty simplistic in nature, mostly default there. And as you'd probably imagine from a default aircraft, most of these systems don't work. Many of the switches are not clickable as well. I was hoping to showcase the F18 by carrying out the Spotlight landing challenge in the aircraft. Unfortunately though, I can't seem to get that to display in my sim currently. According to Asobo, you need 4 hours of flight time in various different situations, which I seem to have ticked off. But nonetheless, I'm not showing the option for the Spotlight Landing Challenge, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, the Spotlight Landing Challenge takes place at Miramar Naval Air Station, so we'll head over there and once again just put the aircraft through a very quick flight to get a bit of a feel for the flight modelling. Okay, so we're now on the ground at Miramar Naval Air Station, and once again we'll take a quick lap around the field in the F18 just to get a bit of a feel for the flight model. So coming up to full power. The nose wanting to come up of its own accord there, which is a little bit strange. Anyway, positive climb, we'll get the gear up, we'll get the flaps up as well. We'll fly straight ahead initially, we'll come up to around 350 knots, then we'll come back on the stick. We're just going to fly overhead the field and then we'll come back round for landing onto runway 24. So there's our 350 knots. Again, overall the aircraft feeling very default to fly, but fairly good fun nonetheless. Over the top, we'll roll out. So we'll let the speed build up to 500 knots, then we'll cut the power and we'll come back round onto runway 24. So off the power. And we'll come fully back on the stick. So that's full stick there. The aircraft may be behaving a little bit less aggressively than I would have expected, but I'm not that familiar with the F18, I'm sure some of you will know better. Take the gear down, we'll go full flaps. And we'll come back round onto final. High speed here at the moment, but we'll bleed some of that off as we come back onto the approach. I'm not sure whether or not I prefer the new sim lighting or not really. Overall I think it looks very nice, it looks a bit more washed out. Overall I would say that the F18's flight model feels a little bit more cartoony than the rest of the aircraft we currently tried. It's not awful, as I said, it's basically up to default standards, but it doesn't feel like the aircraft has a whole lot of weight or inertia to it. As you can see, we're getting quite slow here as well, which is my fault, but it doesn't feel like there's much feedback from the aircraft. And cutting the power. There's touchdown. Overall, the aircraft feels very strange in terms of its ground handling. Almost feels like we're running on one wheel here at the moment. Anyway, onto the brakes, we get the aircraft slowed down. Yeah, so overall, once again, a fairly default aircraft in terms of how it flies. Pretty strange on the ground. Reasonable in the air though, and I think a nice fun option for anyone that doesn't currently own a jet in the sim. Last thing worthy of note, it does look as though the HUD's been improved somewhat. As you can see, the drawing there on the HUD quite a bit nicer than we've seen in other aircraft. The last two new additions that we get in the sim are the Pitts S1S. We also get the Cub Crafter's nose wheel version of the NXCub. As I would imagine that both of those probably already make quite good use of the assets available within the sim, both with the Pitts and the NXCub already existing. We're not going to take those for flight, but we'll very briefly look at the model and the internal cockpits of the aircraft. As you can see, the Pitts S1S, quite a nice little aircraft, quite cute in its own way. Currently the pilot modelling does clip slightly through the canopy, so a little bit of attention to detail missing there. Internally, the cockpit quite basic, but quite nice at the same time. I will just caveat the Pitts by saying I'm not sure whether or not this is the one you'll actually get with the update. I've also purchased the Reno Air Racing Pack, which comes with a slew of Pitts S1s. As best I can figure out though, this is the one that will feature in the sim update. Lastly, we have the Cub Crafter's NXCub, which is a little bit of a carbon copy of the NXCub, obviously though with a nose wheel. I think that's a nice little addition to the sim. The NXCub is a pretty capable aircraft, and having a nose wheel obviously makes it a little bit more accessible for some. It's a shame as I am to admit it, I quite enjoy a good nose wheel aircraft, so I'm sure I'll be flying the NXCub at some point in the sim. Internally, as I mentioned just a second ago, obviously a bit of a carbon copy of the NXCub, using the same assets as with the previous aircraft. Anyway, that just about covers the free additions in terms of aircraft to the sim. As I said, we do get a whole host of new airports as well, but we're not going to have time to cover all of those today. So we're just going to finish up this video with what I think is the most interesting aspect of Sim Update 7, the introduction, albeit in a beta phase, of DirectX 12. We're going to be looking at some side-by-side screenshots in the DA40 departing out of Carnarvon Airport. I've set up the same time of day and the same weather conditions, so hopefully it should give us a good opportunity to see whether the sims look graphically any different, and of course more interestingly still, see whether or not we get any performance enhancements or not with DirectX 12. As we've already seen though in a couple of the other flights, so far for me DirectX 12 actually performing less favourably than DirectX 11 in the sim. So just departing out of Carnarvon Airport at the moment. Interestingly, as you can see with DirectX 11, which is on the left, we're getting around 84 FPS, as opposed to around 79 with DirectX 12 beta there on the right. So actually getting slightly higher FPS at the moment with DirectX 11, which makes sense. As I mentioned, it's much smoother in terms of performance in my sim. I've been finding, at least on my machine, that I've been having quite a bit of stuttering during flights, as you'll probably have seen. So overall for me, DirectX 11 actually performing much more smoothly. Graphically, there doesn't really seem to be a whole lot of difference there at the moment. Obviously we're expecting to see DirectX 12 continuing to be worked on throughout the sim's life. I have noticed that with DirectX 12 there does seem to be a bit of pixelation when the clouds interact with the terrain. The colours perhaps look a little bit more cartoonish to my eye as well, although I'm not sure whether that's not a sim update in general. And it's always a little bit hard to tell, maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems overall that DirectX 11 actually giving slightly crisper, clearer textures overall. And lastly, just as we come around the corner, you can see we do have very similar lighting between both DirectX 11 and 12. There is a little bit more haze in the left-hand scenario. We do also now have a new weather engine in the sim, or an updated weather engine. We'll talk more about that in the conclusion. But overall, to my mind, not really much difference between DirectX 11 and 12 at the moment. Really just finding DirectX 11 quite a bit smoother. DirectX 12 is probably going to be more help to those of you who are CPU bound within the sim currently, as opposed to myself where I'm currently GPU bound. Anyway, again, not looking to make an in-depth analysis here, but I thought it would be interesting to compare the two side by side. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our brief analysis of Sim Update 7 and all that it has to offer in the sim. As usual, I would say it's a mixed bag. There's certainly a few features that are quite disappointing in terms of them now being broken. For example, the world map, I think that's a pretty fundamental error. I've also found that track IR is now much less usable in the sim. Currently if you pause the track IR then you have to go back into the menu itself to reactivate it as opposed to just using the hotkey. It makes it less user friendly, it also makes it more difficult to take interesting shots from different angles. I've only had an hour or two in the sim so far, so I haven't had a chance to find every bug that may have occurred, but I'm sure there's a few more along the way as well. All that being said, I do think that overall Sim Update 7 is still another move in the right direction for the sim. The additional aircraft are nice to have. For me, there's nothing special there, most of them are fairly average in nature. I think the PC6 is a fun addition to the sim, given that bush flying is absolutely one of the best things to do within Microsoft Flight Simulator, and as I said, I think the Volocopter are a really nice, interesting, different little aircraft. The F18 for me was a little bit of a disappointment. Overall the flight model, pretty cartoonish as I said, the ground handling particularly poor. The pits and the NXCub, again nice little additions to the sim. Obviously we didn't have a chance to check out all of the updated airports, but the ones that I saw were quite nice. We looked at Miramar, I've also seen Reno of course from the Air Racing edition. Asobo claim that they've fixed up the bush trip issues as well now, so quite looking forward to checking some of those out at a later date. DirectX 12 was rather underwhelming for the moment. I was expecting to see at least a little bit of improvement in performance, perhaps some nice new effects or graphical features as well. That's probably my own fault, I wasn't really sure what DirectX 12 was going to offer out of the box. It seems as though it's really just a direct switch at the moment. As I say, expecting to see the sim enhanced over the years now as we have DirectX 12 implementation, so early days, but I think it will improve the sim as we go. Certainly happy to see the addition of some more tutorials. Again, I thought that was rather lacking in the sim, particularly early on. And of course it's nice for people to be able to come into the sim with little or no knowledge and work their way along as they go. Apparently there's been various fixes in terms of the platform stability. So far I've had no issues there. I did occasionally have issues in the past with actually starting the sim up. I will say though I've been having a lot of issues. I've been trying to get a video for you together of the Reno Air Racing, but unfortunately just constantly losing connection to the internet there. I'm not sure whether or not that's my internet connection. I don't expect it is, it's usually reasonable. I think it's probably too many people on the servers or something of that nature. So unfortunately that video is going to have to wait for a few days now. Weather-wise we do have an improved and updated weather engine, particularly using metadata to help ingest live weather. I'm really happy to see that. Again, I haven't had too much exposure to it yet, but certainly one of the things that was lacking with the weather engine in the past is accuracy versus the real-world local conditions. Using metadata should certainly in theory help with that. We do now also apparently get the early vestiges of a replay system within the sim. That's currently still in a development mode though, so I chose not to look at that today. I did try and figure out how to use it, but it wasn't immediately obvious. The update also introduces a slew of fixes for the current default aircraft. So as I said, overall Sim Update 7 maybe not quite as groundbreaking as I was hoping for, but I think it's still taking Microsoft Flight Simulator in a nice direction. For me, overall, probably my favourite change is the ability to turn off the logbook pop-up at the end of a flight. That's something that's been bugging me now for some time, and I know many of you as well, so I think it's really nice that Asobo have finally fixed that. And really it's just one of those minor changes that makes the sim feel a little bit more sim-like as opposed to rather gamey. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoyed the video and this brief rundown on Sim Update 7. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you do want to see more content from the channel, then subscribing obviously the best way to do so. It really helps the channel to grow as well. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. As always, a really huge thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. Very much appreciated. I hope all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.